Okay, you have blue, purple, blue. I'm gonna give you blue instead. We'll make it a little bit easier for my eyes. Okay. And I will let you come up here at this station. And blue, your word is believe. Believe, okay? And if you had a partner, what I would want you to do is you and your partner discuss how the word believe impacts your classroom. Okay? Believe. Alright? And believe. And if, like I said, if you had a partner, I would have you and your partner discuss believe, okay? And I'm going to give you this pretty, we'll consider that pink, okay? And your word is connection, okay? Your word
Just
is...
write it up here.
And if you had a partner, what I would have you do is you and your partners discuss how the word connection impacts your classroom, okay? And your word, you got pretty green, your word is ownership. Use this one over here against the wall. Ownership. And same thing, think about how the word ownership would impact your classroom. Now, Mr. Caton, your word is a little bit different, okay? Your word, and did I give you a black marker? You can write right there on that, okay? Your word is consistency, okay? Your word is consistency. And as we're going, you're going to be the last one to talk to us a little bit. I want you to think about some of the things that each of these say, and then what consistency has to do.
Okay.
Okay? All right. So we'll try to help each other out here just a little bit, okay? And that way you don't feel so alone. Anyway, I'm going to give you a piece of blue paper. You just hold on to it. Keep it handy. I'm going to give you a green. I'll give you the black. And I'm going to give you your orange. Pink. There you go. Pink. All right. All right. So whenever you go into your classroom, let's help her out here. Why would the word believe be important? What do we have to believe in? Students. Okay, we have to believe in our students. Write that up there. What else do we have to believe in? We have to believe in their capabilities. Do we have to believe in what else?
Our instructional ability.
Our instructional ability. We have to believe in our students. We have to believe in, what else did we say? In their abilities. We said we have to believe in our capabilities and the teacher's abilities. How about our support staff? Do we have to believe in them? Do we have to believe in their capabilities to assist and to help?
Our educators.
Our educators. I could not have made it without the ones that I work with. Okay, so we're thinking about the word believe there. Let's go over to ownership. Whenever we're thinking about our classrooms, and like I said, this is not an easy job. When we think about our classrooms, what's the importance of ownership? What do you think of when you think about your classroom? I think about, yes, that's a good one, responsibility. What else do we think about?
Engagement.
Engagement.
There's the students and their teacher, their educators, their classroom, figuratively speaking, they're going to be engaged.
Yes. And we think about, with the responsibility, we think about scheduling. We don't think about scheduling with ownership. And that's not just schedules for students, that's schedules for staff, schedules for us. Definitely ownership. Now let's think back here on the word connection. What do we think about when we think about in our classroom connection? Relationships. What kind of relationships? Student-peer relationships. Student-staff relationships. What other kind of relationships are important for our classrooms to function?
Peer relationships.
Student peer. Student staff. What other kind of relationships are important?
Staff that's like other staff in the building, like if they go out to their classrooms.
Staff to staff? How about staff with parents?
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very important.
You know, what I've noticed more so than in any other cadre of students is that the low incidence teachers have a closer rapport with the parents or guardians than any of the other teachers. That's what I've observed.
Yep.
Now, part of it is because of the smaller class sizes,
Yes.
but still, that being
I
said,
think that, and I also think a lot of it has to do with the health and safety needs of
Correct.
those children. So, let's go over here now. Now that we have discussed connections, we've discussed ownership, and we've discussed belief, what about consistency? What about those things what makes consistency important?
in order to have success, you've got to have consistency
Consistency with what?
with all these characteristics.
Okay.
With professional relationships, whether it's staff to staff or student to their peers in their classrooms or their peers outside of their
Yes.
classrooms, because remember, many of our students are in gen ed classes. They're out in the lunchroom. We just had that conversation. They're participating in some activities in many instances, but consistency in how we feel about ourselves as students and educators, that's got to be consistent, because if it's inconsistent, that's a recipe for negative student outcomes.
Yes.
And the same is for ownership, which perhaps is the fundamental characteristics, because if you don't own it
Yep.
consistently, it's a recipe for disaster. Because I've seen those. I've seen the lack of consistency across those characteristics.
Now, let me ask you this. Could you do this? Could you manage the connections, the ownership, and all the believing? Could you manage all of that by yourself? Could you manage it by yourself?
I guess it's possible, but it'd be really difficult.
For just 1 second, try that sheet of paper and go get that. I'm going to give you the whole stack of green code. I'm going to give you the whole stack of blue code. And I'll give you a whole stack of orange code. Okay? Now, I want you to try that. The whole thing. Just try the whole thing out.
Be very strong.
So, is it a lot easier for us to do these things as a team? Okay? Yes. The thing about it is, that we have to remember, that you have to remember, is you are the leader of that team. You are the leader of your classroom. So, the ownership that you take, the believing that you have in your students in your classroom, the connections that you try to build with your staff and with your students and with your parents, that sets the tone for your classroom. And you always have to remember that, okay? So I want to take these back. And I start with that because, like I told you earlier, I don't want to give you fluff, per se. You can sit back down. I don't want to give you all fluff. I've been there, and I know it's not an easy job. You're charged with compliance, with paperwork. You're charged with instruction, and you're charged with health and safety, and you're charged with managing not only students and student behaviors, but you're charged with managing adults, okay? So there's nothing that you could really tell me, probably, that you experience in your classroom that I have not probably experienced, okay? But that being said, it's not an easy job, and it's not one that can be taken lightly. I want to cover just like I said, a few tips and tricks and things like that. I do not feel that I was adequately prepared whenever I first got out of college and I started teaching. I made a lot of mistakes, not just paperwork mistakes. Looking back, there's a lot of things that I would have done differently. Professional development helped. but experience help. And so that's something that you gain over time. So I want to be realistic, and I want you all to think about these things, and I want you to share with me too some of the things that you all have experienced as well. Like I said, we're looking at best practices, classroom management, we're looking at transitions, we're looking at all these things to try to close the gaps for all of our kids. The use of the MSD classroom and checklist. You all need to think about trainings that you need. You need to talk with your administrators at your school level. Always go to your administrators at your school first and let them know if you have training needs, and then go to your consultants or go to your director of special education so that they can help you get the trainings that you need. If you feel like you're weak in an area, that needs to be what's on your professional growth plan. Your professional growth plan don't need to just be filled up with things that are not meaningful, okay? They need to be meaningful. We have to set up quality MSD environments. And like I said, we have to establish appropriate growth goals for yourself. And you have to be able to self-evaluate and self-monitor your teaching practices and establish some of the set norms and things of your district. I'm going to share with you here in a little bit, like whenever I come into a classroom, some of the things that I look for and some of the things that I'm sure that your administrators look for whenever they come in. I always tell my teachers, and I'll tell you, safety is the utmost priority, okay? Safety is always first. Best practices and focus areas, lesson plans, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, designing instruction for your class. Schedules for students and schedules for staff. Those schedules can cut out a lot of problems for you. There's always paraeducators that have been there for a long time, and there's always new paraeducators that have just come on board. And you have to make sure that we're being equitable with them, as I say, and we need to make sure that staff in your classroom always know what they're supposed to be doing and for how long they're supposed to be doing it and who they're supposed to be working with. That has to be something that your staff is aware of. Schedules for your students. Students need to know what kind of work, how much work, what to do when they're finished, because if those things are not in place, then that's where you're going to have a lot of behavior problems. And you're going to have a lot of kids off task. And when kids are off task, that's whenever I found that I had my biggest downfall. I usually did really, really good to start the mornings off. My mornings went great. We did calendar time, it was whole group activity, and then we would do, we'd split up, we did maybe some language arts, and we would do some math, and then we would do some vocational skills. Okay, got my reading done, got my math done. The second half of the day was a disaster. From lunch on, it was absolute disaster in my classroom, and honestly, that was because of poor planning. And that was poor planning on my part, because I didn't plan enough for my students. So, like I said, got to think about those things. Behavior intervention plans. And your behavior intervention plans, if you want to be successful, they have to be implemented across all settings. It can't just be in your classroom. It can't just be one aide that implements it or one teacher that implements it. It has to be on the bus. Your bus driver needs to be aware of it. The aides need to be aware of it. The staff that's monitoring your kids in the cafeteria need to be aware of it for a behavior plan to be successful. Also, you need to have folders and things for implementing your monitoring of your IEPs. A lot of different things there. I'm going to go back up there just a second to schedules for staff. I could not have made it. Like I told you, I could not have made it without the support staff, the paraeducators that were in my classroom. But I never wanted to make a paraeducator feel like that they were beneath me. That I would ever ask them to do something that I would not do myself. Now, mind you, whenever we had multiple students that required transition for toileting or need to be fed through G-tubes or had trach needs, or if we had kids that had to have diaper changes or whatever, I did not expect just one person or two people to have to do that all the time. It's a hard job. Some of our kids are big, larger in size, and it's difficult. Like I said, it's difficult. But I never expected just one person. That's why we had schedules in place, and that's why we rotated. And I rotated through that schedule with them. Like I said, I would never ask them to do something that I would not do myself. Communication. Communication was really big. I made sure that I met with my paraeducators, that I let them know about the schedules and individual student schedules, and that I expected those to be followed, that there wasn't any exception for it as far as unless there was a, if you're supposed to be in my room and we're supposed to be working, we're going to be working. And so anyway, I made sure that that expectation was very, very clear. The other thing is communication. I did not allow, and I suggest this to all my teachers right now, I did not allow paraeducators to communicate with parents. That was my job as a certified staff member to communicate with the parents, or my principal's responsibility to communicate with the parents. What I found was that whenever parent educators were communicating with the parents, maybe the way that they saw things or they interpreted things was different than I did. And a lot of times that would upset parents and then cause a headache for me or for the school. So that was always something that, I just made sure that the communication, that came from me. As far as, you've got your caseload management, your progress monitoring, your alternate assessment, accountability requirements, and of course, your emergency plans. You want to make sure that you have emergency plans. If you have paraeducators that are going to be absent and things like that, my paraeducators were aware that one of the rules inside my classroom was I didn't allow substitutes to change diapers. I feel like that those kids deserve privacy, and I feel like that their parents deserve privacy, and I feel like that if that was my child, I wouldn't want a substitute that had never worked with my child, that didn't know my child, that had not had training in lift or transfer to come in and change diapers on my child. And I just felt like that out of respect for that child, it should be someone that's consistently working with them. As far as like lesson plans, getting your baseline data, and having important conversations with teachers and staff, and what it may look like in your classroom, it's going to be different. Your administrators are aware that it's going to look different. It's going to be different. Whenever I was in college, I remember even for my student teaching and a practicum that I had to do, I remember having to develop a lesson plan. And that lesson plan was so lengthy. It had what Billy Bob was going to do for math and his standards and his learning intention, and it also had his success criteria, and it had how I knew if he mastered it or not, and where we were at with the we do, I do, you do, okay. And then I'd have Sarah. Now Sarah's in a different grade, and I would have her math, same thing for her. And then I'd have Jimmy, and his math was second grade, so I'd have his all down through there. And mind you, I was in a K-8 school. I had kids in kindergarten, and I had some kids that were in 8th grade. So me doing that for math for every kid, me doing that for reading for every kid, me doing that for social skills for every kid, me doing that for writing for every kid, it was unrealistic. It was unrealistic. And I mean, that was one of the biggest things that I struggled with early on, was planning for my students appropriately, doing exactly what needed to be done and that I could fulfill and do while doing progress marketing. So schedules helped me out a whole lot with that. But like I said, my administrators were also very supportive in trying to help me with that. Because it's almost like a one-room schoolhouse, one-room school inside, because you have kids with multiple grades that have multiple standards that have to be taught. One of the things that I realized early on is teachers, general education teachers, reteach. They reteach all the time. If they're doing a lesson and that student or group of students do not understand the concept, what do? They go back and reteach. If the kid didn't get it in 7th grade, they're in 8th grade now, they go back and they reteach it. We reteach all the time, and our students are the same way. So we did a lot of grouping of students, and sometimes they were not in the same grade level when they're grouped. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit too, but about how important it is to make sure that we're covering all the standards and different ways that we can do that. But it's difficult. So let me ask you this. Right now in your lesson plans, what is your administrators requiring from you as far as lesson plans? We'll start with you.
Well, previous years, like when I was in high school, they had me focus on one grade and one subject.
Okay.
So that was the first couple of years. And then, so in the middle school, we started out with very lengthy, I don't have to do the grid circle, so we just started with new, I realized that it was too much. It was impossible for me to keep up with. And so then we just stopped at the first 2, and then
Okay.
that was it.
Like I said, it's hard to write a lesson plan for every individual student in your class. How about you? Like, what do they require of you for like lesson plan?
Ours is online, and everyone has their own copy on, I don't remember, but I saw how they did that, and it's just like it's like a year-long thing, it's mostly required from Gen Ed, not necessarily, especially if it's so much different, but we can still just kind of do what we can, but we're kind of like just us.
Nothing for just you.
So ours is just kind of like a year-long.
This is consistent answers that I get. We've had. How about you don't know yet? All right. You don't know yet. Okay. So we know that with alternate assessment, we've got standards in reading, language arts, reading, writing. We have standards in science and social studies. We have standards that are in math. Of course, we have vocational things. Then you have to think about your IEP goals for our students. We have reading, language arts goals. We have math goals. We don't necessarily have science and social studies goals. They're kind of embedded into the math per se. We have daily living, functional skills. And we are in charge of covering that for every single student. Sometimes you have, 11 students in there? And a lot of these students are nonverbal. You've got students that are aggressive. And it's hard. And I know it's hard. But there's some tips and there's some things that will make it a little bit easier for you, and we'll get into that in the next little session. But I want you to be thinking about your lesson plans. What are you teaching each block, each day? And have a weekly lesson plan or a group lesson plan. List the students' goals and objectives. IEP, when we talked about the alternate, containing some of the assessment areas. And lesson plans available in a binder, a clipboard, on a folder, or share. If you don't have something planned out, it's going to make for a very, very long day. Okay? And up front, this is a lot of work. But what you get completed the first year, the second year you can add to it. Yes, she's shaking her head, yes. And the third year, you can add to it a little bit more. And if you have an outline of the instruction and things that needs to be implemented, you can have your paraeducators assist you with that. If you have the material at the table that you're wanting 2 kids, or 1 kid, or whatever to work on, they can assist you with that. But you're going to have to make sure that you have the materials ready. You're going to have to make sure that you're covering all your standards and all your goals. Okay? That's the biggest thing. Schedules, like I said, a lot of different ways. There's picture schedules. You have some kids that can read, that can check the boxes off. The paraeducators, what classes do they need to be in? Who are they working with? You need to have a classroom schedule and related services schedule. And also, like I said, this brings about a lot of accountability for the adults inside that classroom. Each student needs an individual schedule, whether that be in a folder or whether that be something that is at their desk, with picture supports that they can move around. But you also need a classroom schedule to keep yourself on track. And and that you can move through, and you can model for your students when reading is over, when writing is over. Use visual timers with your kids, something that they can see that lets them know that the reading time, math time, sensory time, that it's almost over, and use them consistently. That was one of our words, using them consistently. Related services. I don't know about you, but with me, my related service providers had a hefty schedule, and when they came to me, I see grins, was kind of unannounced. Yeah, they're supposed to be there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but maybe they showed up this week, maybe next week they didn't show up. Or maybe they come on Monday because they knew they weren't going to be there on Tuesday, and it was at a different time. And one of the things that brought a lot of chaos in my classroom was when the related service provider come in and my kids were doing something, a choice activity that they wanted to do and they didn't want to go with the related service provider. And it was kind of unannounced. So I tried to turn that into something fun for my kids. Same way with like a program that was in the gym. I may not know about that program until that morning up. And so we had to be flexible with things like that. So what I would do was on my classroom schedule and on the student schedule, I had these little smiley faces. And on top of them I wrote surprise. So anyway, it was a surprise, and I tried to make it a good thing. So whenever they said, it's time for your OT services, I would pull that smiley face thing out and I would say, oh, it's a surprise. You get a surprise on your schedule right now. You don't have to do your math right now because you got a surprise. I try to make it something that, big and fun for the kids. Another thing too, when I'm talking about these schedules and I'm talking about grouping, you see how like we use some of the colors today. I use colors on everything. Everything was color coded inside my classroom, and that got my students out. So we had frogs. At one point, we had frogs, and some were blue, some were green, some were yellow. And you would not believe how much time I spent trying to get kids to sit down at a horseshoe table because Jimmy didn't want to sit beside Carol, and Carol didn't want to sit beside Bob, or they wanted to sit on the end, or this or that. Well, they had name tags that had little frogs or whatever, and I seated them where I wanted them to sit because I knew you two weren't going to get along, and I knew that those two were going to get along. So whenever I grouped them, I had all that stuff in mind, and so I would have a green frog here, and I'd have a yellow frog here that would be down on the table, and I would have a blue frog here. And so when the kids come back from lunch to sit down at their table for their stations, they just had to match up their frog and sit down. There was no question on everybody running around playing musical chairs. They knew, and we did the same thing for snack. If it was time for snack, that was, And we use those also as like transition objects to transition to speech, or to transition from the classroom to the lunchroom. Outside the lunchroom, I had like little squares, and the kids could take their square and match it up. They knew that it was time for them to go in there. I could give them, they learned really, really quickly to give transition objects, and they would go to that area. So that helps out a lot. Teacher schedules, that's what I was talking about. Object schedules, work schedules, pair schedules, staff schedules, behavior interventions inside the classroom. Like I said, all staff have to be on board, and you set the tone for that. And anytime that you put a behavior intervention plan in place, if you spoke to Doug, he would tell you the behavior is going to get worse before it gets better, and it will. But that goes back to being consistent, and everybody has to do it across the board, across all settings, for it to work. Everyone's got to be aware of the behaviors and the behavior plan. Do your students need work cards, work systems, reinforcement schedule? I always try to do reinforcement inventories, and I try to watch my kids really, really closely and talk to their parents about their siblings, about what they like and what they don't like. Because if you like chewing gum and every single day I give you bubbles, it's not going to work. But if you like bubbles, or you like, what I'm saying. So I had to be sure that I knew what each child liked as far as like reinforcers. I used a lot of first and then charts. Are you all aware of those? First and then? Are you aware of first and then charts? It's just a T-chart, and we use pictures. And on this side, it would say first, and on this side, it would say then. And let's say, first, we're gonna do the math, and I'd have a picture of the math. And then you get the reinforcer. And I have a big list of reinforcers for them to use. A lot of times they want the technology, the iPads and things like that. But anyway, first and then, I use a lot of those. Work systems. Here's what I want to say about work systems, okay? I have work systems in my classroom. My husband, bless his heart, he helped me tremendously to make teach boxes and tasks that students can do. File folder activities, file folder games. Here's the thing about that. Teaching kids to do an independent workstation, it has to be taught. You can't put a student at an independent workstation and just expect them to sit there and independently do the work. It's not going to happen. They're going to get up, they're going to throw it. Sometimes they will throw it, it's not going to get completed. They're going to get up and wander around to other areas that they're supposed to be. You cannot really have an independent workstation, especially with students, if you have not taught them how to use what you're putting in the independent workstation. Not just the materials, but the flow of the workstation, that we work left to right. If you have buckets, or whatever the type of task is, and first we do this, then it's completed, we have to put the lid back on it, whatever, and go from left to right. It's finished, put it down in the finished tub, get another one. You can't expect kids to stay in an independent workstation unless you've taught them what's in the workstation, and that needs to be taught in either your whole group, small group, individual instruction, and then you have to teach them the work system, working left and right, and what to do with each thing as they're finished with it. Because if you don't teach it, they don't know it. Data on your IEP goals and objectives. On the goal is supposed to be kept twice weekly. I'm sure that your directors have told you that we went over that several times here at the co-op as well with all the directors in this area. But your data collection is just good. It's just part of good teaching, okay? And you can have paraeducators to assist you with some of this. They're going to be aware of the students' goals. And if there was a paraeducator that's working on math goals at a center or something with kids as they come through, and they're aware of that goal, and they're checking to see if the student can do that independently where they're at, then they can assist you with the progress module. With the gradual release model, that most everybody uses that, is, I show you how to do it. And then we do it together. And then you do it, independently. The independent part is where I try to gather my progress at, because that truly lets me know if they're able to do it independently with prompts, how many prompts, what kind of prompts, and that kind of thing. So I always try to gather my progress monitoring from them doing the independent part of it. Goals should be implemented throughout the instructional day and embedded in activities. We want our kids to be able to generalize skills. So it's not that if we're working on counting change and we have coins out, that I have to gather that progress monitoring just during that math portion of us counting that change. Whenever it's snack time and they go to get a juice, or they go to get a cookie or whatever, popcorn that's being sold, that's an opportunity for you to gather progress monitoring. Same way, you want them to be able to generalize those skills and use it. That's the best time for you to gather that progress monitoring, is in those settings, not just right there at the time that you're teaching it. Another thing, the thing on the bottom there, parents trained on how to work with students and implement their goals. You can't just expect a paraeducator to know how you want them to work with the student. Sometimes you have to teach them. And that's another thing. If you feel like that paraeducator has some professional growth needs, you need to let your administrator know. You need to let the director know, so that they can make sure that the paraeducator is getting some additional training in the ways to assist those students as well. One of the big things, and I don't think it was done intentionally per se, but sometimes early on, before I realized that I needed to do that, I would have parent educators. And you ever heard the term fuel the fire? Okay, and I don't think that they necessarily done it intentionally, but they did not early on have the techniques or the understanding of how to de-escalate situations. And once they received that training on how to de-escalate the situation, it helped tremendously. So sometimes it's just a lack of understanding, and like I said, they may need training too, so don't forget about the trainings that they may need. Like I said, the daily communication log with the parents, and like I said, we've always kind of had that with certified staff. I don't know if it's a problem in your classroom, but a lot of the classrooms I go into that are low incidence classrooms, there's multiple staff in there, and a lot of times I see multiple staff on phones. I see eyes getting big. I see some eyes getting big in here. Our kids are there. Their parents are sending them there. They want the best that they can possibly get from you and the best that they can possibly get from support staff. And if staff are on their phones, our kids getting that. And and that's just how I talk with the paraeducators that were in my classroom. Yeah, sometimes there's emergencies, I understand that. Yeah, there's sometimes that there's things going on that, a phone call needs to come through, but there's breaks and there's lunches and things like that. That gives time for that. So, that's something that I ask, put away. I'm not going to have mine out, you're not going to have yours out. It's time for us to work, and those kids deserve the best of us while they're here. With the communication logs, there were times that I did ask our educators to write in there for me, and I would sign underneath it or something like that. But I always tried to make sure that the other biggie was I made sure that I told them, I do not want you communicating with the parents of these students. I do not want you communicating with them by text or Facebook Messenger. I've seen it cause multiple disasters. Parents are happy and parents are content when everything is going the way that they want, but I promise you, if something makes them upset, that can be your absolute worst nightmare. And there's always some people that will stir the pot, try to make your job a lot more difficult and cause chaos in your classroom. I hate to say that, but that's the truth. So sometimes limiting the amount of people that are responsible for communicating with the parents helps in those situations. Always remember to send report cards and progress home at the same rate as regular education students. Communicate with all your service providers. This one here didn't per se cause me any trouble sending report cards or progress reports home. I knew I needed to send that home midterm and final, unless the ARC agrees it's going to be daily or weekly. And if the ARC agrees to something like that, then you're held accountable for that. Okay, and I have had parents before say, I want to know every day, and the ARC agreed to that. So remember that. But one thing that did catch me up early on, well, I wouldn't say early on, but it caused me some trouble or whatever, was I had a parent come in. All my other kids get homework, but you never send any homework. You never send any homework home. And I explained to her, I said, well, I try to help the kids in the class. We try to complete as much of it as we possibly can in the class, and they have a little bit of time at the end of the day to, work on things to get caught up or whatever. Well, when their brothers and sisters come home with homework, and they don't have no homework, it causes me a problem because they are having to do homework and this one's not having to. And I was like, I can fix that. We can fix that. We can remedy that. So I did send home some 5-folder activities and things that the kid had already knew how to do. It was just reinforcing practice and things like that. But that is one of the things that I have had, several parents ask for homework. You're responsible for your caseload, timelines, making sure that you have your I's dotted, your T's crossed. I suggest get you a calendar. I had an old-fashioned calendar. I still do a lot of times. I have an old-fashioned calendar, which I do use my Google Calendar and Outlook calendar a lot too. But the first thing I did was print off my caseload summary. I I would go down that caseload summary, I would look at all of my IEP due dates, I would look at all of my eligibility or reevaluation due dates, and put them in those calendars. You know up front that parents have to have at least 7 days notice in advance. If they don't show up the first time, you have to give them another 7-day notice, and if they don't show up the second time, you have to give them a 3rd-day notice. So ultimately, that's 21 days. So what I did was I always started a month in advance. I put my meeting dates for the art meeting for Jimmy a month before it was actually due. For reevaluations, I did those 6 months before they were due, because you've got to get all the evaluations completed. Once that parent signs consent for the evaluation, you got to get your adaptive behavior done. You got to get your parent interviews done. You got to get the actual testing done, the reports back, and all that. Behavioral observations. So I started those 6 months in advance. Don't forget your winter. Sometimes we have bad winter. This past winter wasn't bad, but we did have bad winter. And just because we have a bad winter, KDE is not going to excuse your timeline. I promise you that. So think about those kids. Think about those kids that you have that fall in January, February. Start them early. Have them early in advance, okay? So get you a calendar, write down, I'm going to send this notice out, this date. Don't forget to have your administrator sign your notice. But I'm going to make sure that they're aware that they're going to be chairing that meeting and all that. But send those out early. Get you a calendar and write down and mark them off as you go. That's the easiest and the best way. Alternate assessment accountability requirements. You're going to have different standards for each grade level. And like I said, I believe in keeping a working book. So I don't know if that's how you all do that or whatever. We have the Autism Helper curriculum. We also have the Special Ed Simplified. That's something that we bought. Okay. The Special Ed Simplified actually covers every single standard, even vocational. And I don't know if y'all have had the opportunity to see that. It's not very expensive. We bought it for all of our teachers. But anyway, it has work samples, it has the pre-assessment, and it has the post-assessment for every single standard.
Wow. But don't you still have to use different, don't you have to have working samples that are different for each student still?
Yes, yes. But that will help you out a whole lot if you don't have any place to like start. And the work samples that they give you, if you're nonverbal, it will have pictures for that work sample for you. And if you are verbal and you're able to read some, it may have, so there's different levels to it for the same standard. So that's definitely something for you to think about. At each, I run centers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I run centers, and so at each center I had like a section color coded by kid. Your frog was yellow, I knew that you needed these standards. That was in there, that was in the yellow thing. So in the yellow cabinet. So I made sure that you had all the standards and I kept all your work samples together. That's another way that you can show progress to the parents whenever they come in, because you got your pre-assessment. This is where we were at. This is where the child started at on the standard. Then you've got your work samples. This is what we worked on. You can add additional activities to that if you need to stay on it. You decide how long the flow, how long you need to stay on it. And then you have your post-assessment that shows whether they got it or they didn't get it. It shows progress or not. So those are samples that you would want to take with you to the art meetings. Those are the samples that you want to discuss the progress, okay? So like I said, keep a working folder of your students' work. Sometimes parents will ask for a lot of it, and that's fine too. I just make them copies in time, but I keep the original there at school for that, because like I said, it has the pre-test, post-test, work samples in there. Emergency plans. If your aides are highly trained and you've trained them and set the tone for them, if you're absent, that classroom is going to continue to go without you. Okay? You don't have to worry while you're off. Your principal's not having to spend the whole day down there because you're off. And a lot of times that's what happens if there's a substitute in there and parent educators aren't trained. There's some that I can tell you right now that if the teacher wasn't there for 2 weeks, but probably wouldn't even be something, but parent educators are so strong. So So that there's all that. Also, you know, like medical protocols, if you have kids that have diastat, if you have kids that have emergency meds, such as EpiPens and all that. Gotta make sure everybody knows, gotta make sure everybody's aware of the bus schedules and the dismissal routines and what bus every kid rides on, or that kid's parent pickup. These are all things that if everybody knows and we're communicating, we're taking ownership of it, everybody's taking ownership of it, it makes everything go a lot smoother. Folders with emergency contacts. When you go on field trips, whenever you go on transition, community-based work transition, you need to have the parent's name, any medications, all that kind of stuff. You need to have a folder that has that for every single kid. That's another tip I can tell you. School-wide, like emergency routes and things like that. Also, make sure that you have like emergency activities and emergency plans that you can leave in case like you're out, say you didn't know you was going to be out, and you got sick that night and couldn't come to work. Make sure that you have like a little stack of extra activities for the kids to do.